Well, hi there. This is Patrick Gray, and this is Risky Business Live. This is the YouTube stream that we do semi-regularly when we just want to talk about a grab bag of topics. And yeah, today's going to be a good one. Let me press the button. There we go. I'm going to introduce everyone else who's joining us. Sherrod DeGrippo from Proofpoint has decided to come along. You may have heard Sherrod in some of the Risky Business sponsor interviews. This is her appearance here today is nothing connected to any form of sponsorship or anything like that. As you'll hear, she has some unique insights that she's going to share with us all. Also joining us is Dmitri Alperovitch, the co-founder of Crowdstrike, who is now doing other things, we'll just say that.
Lots of things.
And finally, we've got Alex Stamos, who is the former CISO of Yahoo, of Facebook. Now he's with Stanford University and has picked up a side hustle. Is that what we're going to call it? A side hustle, a side gig?
That sounds really legit. I appreciate that.
Yeah, he's doing, he's like got on freelancer.com and managed to pick up a gig doing some security work for Zoom. And look, I think that's really what we're gonna kick off talking about today. For starters, is I think when you took on this job, I said to you, like, let's book some time so that we can talk about it publicly, because it's an interesting topic. A lot of people are very interested in it. And of course, you gave me the expected response, which is let's wait a little while until I got something to say. Well, you've kind of got to that point now where some things have actually happened. Why don't you just walk us through what that trajectory's been over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, sure. So I got hired at the beginning of April. It's because I did some tweeting. It's the one time Twitter's been good for my career, was actually criticizing Keybase. Criticizing Zoom. And then the CEO found my phone number through a joint friend and called me. And we had a good discussion. And since then, they've done a lot of things. So, Zoom's hired 3 different penetration testing firms. So there's like 3 tests going on at the same time. Has released a bunch of major versions, including addressing the use of ECB. So there's a change in how crypto works for everybody. That code's in there will be enforced by the end of this month. So right now we're in kind of the test period. And has made a bunch of changes how the product works from a UX perspective. So there's a whole new security center for the host. A lot of the issues Zoom was facing are not really traditional InfoSec issues. They're safety issues about all of the new use cases that people are using the product for, and then making it easy for them to use the tools so that their classes don't get interrupted. People don't do disturbing things during the public yoga class.
Yeah, because there's been these like people turning up naked in school children's classes and stuff because like by default it doesn't make you set a password, or just brute forceable URLs, just those typical safety issues, right?
Right, that or it being posted publicly. I mean, there's a combination of things here. Like almost everything that Zoom actually is telling people to turn on now has always existed. It just hasn't always been easy to find, right? Like this was a product that was really meant for enterprise IT companies to go create an enterprise, instance to hit all those buttons to fit. And what happened is in those first couple of weeks of COVID, when all of a sudden all these schools are going virtual, all these interactions are going virtual, people would go out and create their own private accounts, and the educational ones would get blessed for free. And so you would have like Mrs. Smith set up her own standalone account without any kind of IT support for her 10th grade English class. And that just went poorly, as you can imagine. And so they've done a lot of things like turn up the defaults on that. This weekend was a big test because it was Mother's Day. And Zoom actually lifted the limits on the free accounts for Mother's Day. And I haven't heard any really bad stories coming out of it. So it seems like that was actually a pretty good experiment. And so they've lifted all that up and then made sure that all that stuff's like, the defaults are good and that it's all much more visible, and they've created a bunch of new reporting structures, basically doing the things that you do at a Facebook or a Twitter or a YouTube as a consumer company that you normally don't see from an enterprise company.
It made a lot of sense that you were going to be, jumping into this one because you had similar experiences at Facebook looking at, security at scale, safety at scale, things like that. And, this one's interesting because it is, as you say, it's an enterprise product that all of a sudden is being used by a lot of consumers. But, a lot of the criticism leveled at Zoom throughout this whole thing was about its, what some people saw as its unsuitability for sensitive enterprise use, right? Because there were maybe some issues with, engineering centers in China and stuff like that. There's seen as a supply chain risk, lack of end-to-end encryption. Not that there are really any other alternative platforms that I believe offer end-to-end encryption. I think WebEx can, but it's like I've never seen anyone set it up.
WebEx advertises it. First off, they've never really documented it, so you can't go get like a crypto design. And my understanding is it requires you, it's really for enterprises to set up their own PKI. So like every device has to have a cert that you distribute. So it's not like end to end like a WhatsApp is, right?
Yeah.
Or Signal. It's so none of the products, right? None of the enterprise products provide real end to end. Like the record for that would be FaceTime, for which you can have 32 people in a chat, and those 32 people all have to know each other's phone numbers, right? Which is obviously not the use case for which Zoom works.
And how does that work too, just with end-to-end with video distribution? Does that get really bandwidth intensive? Because, in this instance, I would have to encode 3 copies of my video and beam it to each one of you, right? Like encrypted with your pub key. So you're going to run out of bandwidth, right? Like this is the problem. People don't realize like this is the problem with doing end-to-end encryption on group video is you run out of bandwidth.
So this is actually interesting. So Zoom is not true end-to-end, right? They should not have made that claim. Like the CEO apologized, but it's more end-to-end than the security discourse would suggest, right? Which is, now we're not on Zoom right now, but let's say we're on Zoom and there's the 4 of us and each one of us is receiving 3 streams. If you're on Zoom, what would happen is there'd be an AES key for the entire meeting. And all of us would then derive an AES key from that, and then what's called the stream ID, which is an ID for which streams are sending. And we would be encrypting the UDP packets, and they wouldn't be decrypted until the client got to them. So the vast majority of the content is flowing through Zoom's network encrypted. It isn't decrypting and then re-encoding. It's not doing compositing. All of that stuff actually happens client side. And the kind of secret magic sauce for Zoom is that they're really good at doing things like clients signaling, okay, well, my bandwidth is better. I want a higher bandwidth stream, all this. And then they have like these really fast routers that take all these UDP packets and they multiplex them together into these connections, and then handle it at low latency. The problem is that the key is per meeting, and the key is in the server, right? Now it's in memory.
So they could decrypt if they wanted to, right?
Exactly. And they do in some cases. So if somebody calls in with a phone, right? So you can call in with like a 1975 AT&T phone. They still have wire protocol compatibility back to that. Then what that happens is that key gets transferred to a special bridge machine that then decrypts the content, turns it into VoIP, which then turns into the telephone system. Same thing for like if you connect with like a Cisco room system or a Polycom room system, you obviously can't encrypt on some special protocol that's SIP H323. So it has to be decrypted, remuxed all together, and then sent together. And so in those cases, you effectively can never have true end-to-end. The trick now is, can you design something that is true end-to-end for situations in which Zoom controls all the software, and then some kind of degenerate case that's actually more secure than nothing for all of those other use cases.
Now, I'm guessing this has something to do with why on earth Zoom now owns Keybase.
Yes.
Okay, talk us through that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as part of the Keybase acquisition, there was a blog post from the CEO announcing that Zoom will be offering a true end-to-end encrypted option. Now, as he said in that blog post, that first version is going to be when you turn on end-to-end encryption, it'll turn off back compat with all of that stuff like phone bridges and old room systems. There are Zoom room systems, so that'll work fine because Zoom controls those bits, but like the old Polycoms and stuff. And then also in that announcement, basically said that will be the end-to-end model, and the Keybase team will become the core of the security engineering team that's going to build it. And so there are some, the nice thing about Keybase is they've got some really high-end crypto guys. Like their people are very, very good. And they've also thought about how to make crypto easy. So if you've used Keybase, part of their whole goal was to make GPG usable by normal humans. And so they've done a lot of thinking about how do you build experiences that are secure end-to-end without making that super obvious to people. And part of the big goal here is to change the experience that has brought 300 million daily participants onto Zoom meetings. You got to be very careful changing that, right? You can't turn Zoom into Signal. It can't be a huge pain to use. You can't have people exchanging QR codes before they attend their 7th grade class. And so The Zoom people are really experienced at it and are going to be bringing that kind of knowledge to the work that's going to happen. So they basically become a new team.
I'm curious, Alex. Sorry to cut you off there, but Keybase was having a bit of trouble, right? I've just brought up one of the stories that we covered on Risky Business about how they just, they had big spam issues. They had a dwindling user base because of this. It was sort of like people were complaining it was unusable. So, I mean, was this deal almost like an acqui-hire? Because Keybase, I don't know that Keybase was to the moon. I mean, it feels like maybe this is a way of repurposing that team. Or I mean, I don't know because I don't know much about Keybase. I'm not a user, but it didn't feel like they were setting the world on fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. You can just look at the numbers were not huge. I think the Keybase team cares deeply about giving people private communication, and one way you can do that is you can build a platform and try to grow it from scratch. The other is you jump onto something that has become one of the world's most important communication platforms, and you make it better. And I think this is them deciding that they think that they can take everything they've learned over years and years of building this product and try to very quickly apply it to a platform that already has the use case and already has the traction. I mean, it's tough.
That makes
like,
a
Signal's
great
really
deal of
the
sense.
only. Yeah, Signal's really the only app I can think of that is security first that's ever done remotely well. And Signal's a tiny fraction of WhatsApp, right? Like, this is the interesting thing that kind of drives me nuts about the crypto community. Is people are all about the perfection and doing let's do things purely and perfectly. And the truth is that FaceTime and WhatsApp together have kind of made a bunch of compromises, but they have done more to secure human communications in history than all of the crypto anarchist perfection folks have done through all their criticism and their theoretical designs and the like, right? And I think this is the reality is if you want to keep people's data safe, you have to apply security to a product people want to use. You don't do it by building the world's most secure thing and then hoping that your crypto anarchist friends have enough friends that they're able to make it sticky. That's just
although that seems to be happening with Signal, because I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say I'm surprised by the number of normie friends who, you get those little alerts. Thingo is now on Signal and you're like, you're either having an affair or buying drugs.
Right, and that's the one that's worked. And I think maybe they're going to be big enough that they're going to eat up that space, right? I'm just not sure that you're going to have you're not going to have 5 or 6 signals that are going to be able to compete with one another.
I feel like you can extrapolate that commentary, though, to the entire InfoSec community, not just the crypto part of it.
Yeah. I was going to say now Alex is going to have the entire anarcho-cryptist perfectionist community coming after him. So
it's funny. As
I won't be able to read
as well,
their
I'm
messages.
Like, here we go. He's gonna
So.
drag us into his battles here. So what can we expect? Like, what's a finished product going to look like? What's the vision? Is it going to be like auto key distribution, sort of a la Signal, WhatsApp, or is it going to be more controlled than that? Is it going to be optional, configurable? Is it going to be both? Like, what's the goal, right? Like, why do this?
So you're going to hear more. So what we've promised, I'm not going to do a bad Sean Connery accent, but when Cortez reached the New World, he burned his ships, right? So we've made a promise to have a crypto design out for people to comment on by the 22nd. So that's next Friday. And so there's a lot of work going on of that initial design, and that's going to be for an opt-in, right? So what has been announced right now is that when you set up a Zoom meeting, you'll opt in for it to be a super high security version. I'm not sure what the marketing speak will be for that. And you'll opt into that, and it will disable all the backwards compatibility. It will turn off the phone bridge and then for that, the keys will be generated by the host, and they'll be distributed peer-to-peer to all the recipients. And then the host will be deciding who is let in. And so that will be the highest security version. What comes after that, I'm not really ready to say yet. I honestly don't know. That's something that we're trying to work out is then once you build that system, how do you start to bring on other kinds of features that people are using every day? The interesting thing is, I've been a part of a lot of client calls for Zoom because I'm trying to do, requirement gathering. At the same time, people were talking about, oh yeah, I really want end-to-end encryption. When you talk to them about, okay, well, if you're trying to make your system more secure, you can click this button, for example, to turn off any access to Chinese data centers, right? And like, oh, well, will that turn off the phone bridges in China? And you're like, yeah, you can't call in then on a Chinese phone number. And like, oh, well, we can't have that. And it's just like, I think people are very confused about what they want. Because it's like, there's a lot of people who, want the compatibility option of anybody can call in from anywhere in the world with effectively the local equivalent of a 1-800 number. when it's like, I guarantee most of the countries in the world are recording every single phone call that goes into a major phone bridge, right? I guarantee it. Like, there's absolutely no downside of MSS not having the entire voice record of everybody calling into every major Western phone bridge company. And so, like, part of our goal here is to build something that meets most of the needs, and then builds a standard that maybe people stop doing that, right? And you start to say like, oh, this is so attractive that we're going to kick people off of just calling into the 800 number when we get everybody on the app and get them really end-to-end encrypted. And then my hope is it starts to set the standard, like just like WhatsApp and Signal kind of set the standard of, now if you ship an end-to-end, or if you ship a peer-to-peer messaging product, it's not end-to-end encrypted, it's weird, right? Like Google learned this the hard way when they announced, we're rebranding our stuff again, and people were like, well, where's the end to end? I think that's where I'd like to get on enterprise, is I'd like to get enterprise to the same place where it's considered a weird thing if it's not encrypted.
What's crazy about GChat too?
Rhymes with schmack, right? Of like the company that I think needs to be thinking here.
One of the things that's crazy about GChat too is they make it really difficult to delete conversations, right?
Yes.
Because I like to go through every now and then. For me, it's spring cleaning, right? Like I don't want 10-year-old Facebook messages being torrented, right, as part of some big dump, right? So occasionally I go through, I clear them out. Facebook doesn't make it easy either, by the way. You need to use like a shady plugin to help you, and you're like, God knows what this plugin's doing.
Yeah, same with LinkedIn.
Plugin.
Like unfriending people on LinkedIn is so hard that you have to go download this horrible plugin to do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really sketchy. And then it makes you click through like 7 things to give it OAuth permission. It's not good.
Oh, man. But, it is interesting that, I'm kind of surprised Google hasn't done more in this space, because for me, like as a Chrome user, I find Meet, Hangout, like that's just our default, right? Like we're a G Suite company, very, very small company, obviously, but it's great. You set a calendar note, it automatically generates a Meet thing, bang, just it's done. So for us, it's been funny. It's like, why is everyone using Zoom? And yeah, for this one-to-many sort of stuff, obviously it makes a lot of sense. Now, Dmitri is one of the people who was really agitating for this interview to take place, right? Because he's, when he saw that Zoom conducts a lot of research and development in China, he's like, Dmitri here is a well-known China hawk. So you were itching to get on this stream and ask Alex some questions, Dmitri. So I'm just going to hand the talking stick over to you for a minute, buddy.
Well, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that what they've done with the help of Alex and Katie and others has been absolutely incredible. And one day there'll probably be a HBS case study on how they took what was a really bad situation from a publicity perspective and business perspective and turn it around in a huge way in a matter of weeks. So big kudos to them and Eric for taking this seriously. And I think the progress that they've made, not just on end-to-end, but on all the features that I've seen Zoom implement over the last few weeks have been phenomenal. And I think it comes down to, really to quote the one and only Gluck, your threat model is not my threat model, right? And when you're talking about sensitive communications where you're worried about the Chinese government eavesdropping it on you, and this is probably not 95% of the conversations that actually happen on Zoom, but for that other 5% where you are perhaps the DoD, which has now banned Zoom, or your security company doing an incident response investigation on a Chinese APT, right? Or a company that perhaps is suing the Chinese SOE for IP theft or anything like that. Those types of conversations you probably don't want to have over Zoom because the reality is that their engineering team is almost exclusively based in China. And when you have a situation like that, this is not something that a company can even control. Highly, highly likely that, just as Alex mentioned, that they're probably listening on phone bridges in China, that they've also infiltrated that development team with MSS operatives. And there's always a concern in big tech companies. We've seen it with Twitter and other companies where nation states have infiltrated them and have been able to do significant damage with that inside access.
I mean, yeah, there were cases that Saudi managed to get a couple of operatives working at Twitter, right? And that's
exactly.
And they had DM access and stuff. That was pretty heavy.
So it can happen anywhere, but it's a lot easier to happen when much of the engineering is in China, and you can actually put someone in that perhaps has high level of access and perhaps even multiple people.
Sure.
So that would be my concern.
this is what I'd call the Kaspersky problem, right? Which is, if you are, anyone probably on this meeting is probably not going to run Kaspersky, but, if someone, the average person on the street says, should I use Kaspersky antivirus? You'd say, yes, it's actually very good. And it is, right? It's just probably not very good if you're likely to be at odds with the Russian Federation, shall we say. So, Alex, is there a plan to sort of attempt to architect things in such a way that this concern evaporates, or is it just something where Zoom realizes it's probably not going to wind up with the DoD as a customer?
So DoD is a customer. So I don't know what you're talking about, Dmitri. So the U.S. government has a version of Zoom that runs in a FedRAMP. So there's a completely different Zoom. It's a totally different instance. Right, that runs in a FedRAMP GovCloud. And it's administered only by cleared U.S. citizens. And so, any access to data, it would be pretty obvious that thing.
So GovCloud is not. GovCloud is the public-facing version of it, right? Doesn't require cleared access.
There is a Zoom instance that runs at a FedRAMP facility. So I'm not sure it's actually running.
Right. Yeah. I know a lot about this. So there's multiple data centers that AWS has. Some of them are cleared and actually classified, so completely off the public internet. And then there's a GovCloud version, which only requires you to be U.S. citizen, not a cleared person, to access it. But that's the only requirement.
Right. So there's I can't really speak to anything that's going on the classified side. There's known to be a public non-class for U.S. government only version of Zoom that basically just shares the same software, but is not compatible, right? So like you can't. Yeah. When you have that client, you can only talk to people who are on that instance. You can't talk to randos who want to call it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that explains, they've got their weird domains, right? Like zoomgov.us, etc.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, there's a bunch of Zoom domains. It's all in passive DNS. If you go look it up, it's not super mysterious. And so that's like what's approved for U.S. government use, not the global network, which has data centers all over the place. And you're right. There's always a risk to have Chinese engineers. Is not the entire engineering team. In fact, I'm not sure it's even a majority of the engineering team. There's a ton of people in the U.S. too. And so what they've done is they operationally are splitting up the different regions, and then companies can choose which regions their calls are able to be attached to. But you're right, there's risk, and the whole goal of the end-to-end encryption work is to create an option for those 5% of meetings that you might actually care about, that you don't care about where it's routed through. Right. And then even if you have a Chinese participant in those, then your risk is from their client. It's not from any of the infrastructure that it's transiting.
Alex, quick question. So will the end-to-end design that you're putting together, will it prevent Zoom from having a backdoor that allows them to quietly join in on a meeting and listen in as a participant, where they will get the key just from the peer-to-peer distribution from the host?
Right. So the announcement that already went out said that there will be no lawful intercept capability created, and there will be no capability for a Zoom employee to join secretly, because all the keys will be sent from the host. So the host code will only show people who are joining. And we're looking at different mechanisms by which people can basically mix in their own entropy in a way that basically guarantees that nobody can join. Because you're right. Like
so the ironic thing here is, because there's this, China threat, which really for most people isn't much of a threat at all. Zoom's going to be forced to do all of this extra development work that will probably put them in a better place than most others, right? Simply because of this threat that doesn't apply to most of their customers anyway.
I think that's the long-term strategy. Is Eric sees it like effectively without this crisis, it would be very difficult to make all the changes necessary and to make, he announced a 90-day feature freeze, which is crazy for an enterprise company to spend 90 days of telling your clients like, no, I can't do that special thing for you. No, I can't do the thing necessary to get you to sign a 7-figure contract, right? Like that drives enterprise companies nuts. And you can't do that kind of thing unless you're in a crisis. So I do think part of the, Eric's goal here is not just to fix the bugs, but to create a long-term competitive advantage, because the other companies don't seem to be doing this.
There was some announcement though out of DoD. Was that just to stop people using ad hoc non-Zoom Gov?
That might have been it. It might have been people just creating. I don't know exactly what they announced. What's really funny is we've just gone around and had a really long sort of detailed conversation about this when we were in the staging area before we went live. Sherrod was basically saying, she's the dissenting opinion here in that, Zoom, don't really care, not really that worried about it, right?
I think Alex makes a good point. It's like that 5%. And then the other thing is, I think that I'm a little bit hot take on it, because it's like the InfoSec community put Zoom through the ringer like they have done never before on an enterprise product. And what more do you want? It's like it's like a case study in best practices for dealing with the InfoSec community being upset with you, essentially trying to fix everything that you can possibly fix, trying to make every improvement, pulling in like some of the heaviest hitters that we have in the industry, like Katie. Like, what more do you want? I mean, it's really kind of that example of this is what you do when you run into that trouble.
No, it's been an excellent case study. I think also Zoom got a bit of a kick in the pants last year. I was kind of tangentially involved in it. But there was this, I remember I went to TuskCon in Queensland, a couple of guys there, Michael and Shubs from Asset Note. They had just got back from a Dropbox hosted bounty, like, hackathon or whatever, where Dropbox actually wanted Zoom tested because they were a little bit worried about it. And sure enough, they actually found a really bad RCE. So flash forward a couple of months later and someone posted that they'd found this bug, it was like being used to like auto join or something. It was like you could force people to auto join. It was something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was reading the write-up and I recognized it as the first like 75% of the RCE, and the guy just didn't get there. So then at that point, I'm like, okay, Zoom had already had this reported to them months prior, had done absolutely nothing about it. They had done nothing about it. That is just sad but true after Dropbox had reported it to them. But then, at that point, I started making some noise and Michael and Shub started making some noise that, hey, maybe this is actually RCE and you want to fix it. And then, of course, the second they fixed it, they did a blog post explaining the RCE. And they did get a good kick in the pants last year over that. Do you guys even remember that? I mean, Alex,
I remember that.
You remember that? Yeah. And it was so funny because I remember saying to the guy who'd posted the original blog post, because of course the Asset Note guys hadn't talked about it publicly at all, right? And then, the first guy posted a blog post. I'm like, man, you are so close. And then when he saw the extra thing that he had to do to get RCE, he was like, God damn it. I published too soon, that was an interesting thing. Did they change much after that whole experience, Alex? I mean, I know you weren't working with Zoom at that time, but is that sort of part of the internal law?
Yeah, I mean, not enough. That's the thing. And that's when the investment in like SDLC practices should have happened that are happening now, right? And so there's the bug squashing, trying to find and squash bugs. But then there's also looking at how do you change the build system? How do you redesign the app to do privilege separation? How do you make it so, I mean, we all know like these products are actually extremely risky, right? Like a competing company, I'm not going to say which one, had a bug last week where a malicious GIF could take over your entire organization. And there's no discussion at all in the security media, which was an interesting choice.
Hey, excuse me, there was.
You did, yes. Right.
Did we? I think I don't even know if we did.
I don't know if you did.
No, we did. We did.
Right.
And it was funny, right? Because I think Malware Tech had a hilarious tweet where he's like, all those people have been bashing Zoom, when they see the Microsoft Teams bug. And then, he had that GIF of the puppet, like that one.
Yeah. Well, and it's because these products are like, they're all attack surface, right? You're like, here's some code where, okay, what's it going to do? It's going to take video streams from strangers and decompress them at extremely high speed in memory. And it's going to take links and GIFs and files and this and that. And they're, it's tough. And so one of the things that, we have a team working on is trying to architect the system so if there's one of these bugs, it's not immediately RCE, right? That it's hard to exploit. And then if you exploit it, you need to chain it up. And, the kinds of things people have done around Chrome and the like, which, I think the Microsoft transition after 2002 and the less discussed work that Brad Arkin did at Adobe is kind of the model here, right? Except instead of doing it over years, we got to do it over months.
Well, I think,
and this is the thing. It's been 10 years of corporate growth in a month or two, right? Sherrod, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think also another part of it is we haven't had a big browser vulnerability in a while. So people are like, "Ooh, vulnerabilities in these other things. Like I can't get a browser vulnerability, can't get exploit kit, but hey, I'll bang on Zoom for a while." So
exactly, and the crazy one with that Zoom RCE was it primarily affected people who'd had Zoom and then uninstalled it, because it left behind a daemon that when you threw like a executable at it, it would, with the right name or whatever, with some.
It had a it was a web server pinned to localhost, right?
Yeah,
so
it was. It was a web server pinned to
localhost,
where you could actually throw it some, so you could throw it an executable and it would just assume that was Zoom coming back, right? So there was it was just a dumb architecture at that point, right?
I mean, there's legit problems. The weird thing on the media side is like, there's a mixture of legit security problems, of dumb ones. So like I think the New York Times wrote 3 different stories that mentioned a local privilege escalation in the OS 10 installer, right? That if you have active shell, active UI control of a machine when somebody's installing Zoom, only during that window you can get local privilege escalation. I pointed out to one of those reporters that like the last major OS 10 patch had like 20 local privilege, right? Like it's just hilarious. Like there's 3 New York Times articles about this one privilege escalation.
I feel like some reporters, certainly at some of the larger newspapers, not only do they not quite understand the tech side of their beat, they're almost actively hostile towards people who point that out to them.
Yeah. Well, and they've got their theme, right? Like it seems at any moment there's only like 7 themes in the tech press and everything has to fit those, right? So you can take any constellation of CVEs and you can fit them to that theme. And then there's legitimate, I mean, the worst things that are happening are the takeovers of people's meetings. But the problem is that the press coverage of it talks as if that's related to things like end-to-end crypto or a local privilege.
They smash them all together like they're this just one big security hole, which completely user controlled versus something on the Zoom software development side. But it's like a prank phone call. I mean, anybody could do it, and that one was definitely overblown.
Well, and it's not like they weren't moving to fix it, right? Like, of course, when you're getting flashes bombing kindergarten classes, it's not like they're going to sit around and not fix that.
Right. And then also, I think what needs to happen, and there you will be hearing some about this, is there needs to be prosecutions of those worst cases where people are exposing themselves to children and stuff, and that's going to happen. And that's what, because right now what you've got is these Discord channels and stuff of kids who are bored, they're stuck at home. They're skids. They got no skills. And so they're going and they're scraping for Zoom links and they're trading with each other, or they're trading like.
So you're doing your best to piss off cryptographers and skid armies. Thanks.
Yeah, well,
thanks. Just direct your attacks towards.
You've made a lot of enemies on this little stream today. The anarcho crypto perfectionists are coming for you. The skiddies are coming for you.
Man is measured by his enemies. Somebody said that.
Hey, so we've got a question here from Neil Krawitz, which is, after these issues are addressed and mitigated, are there plans to persuade Google, the Taiwan government, the US government, and other groups that it's safe to remove these, no Zoom restrictions? That's a good question. Thank you, Neil. Alex, do you know? I mean, that's probably a business decision for other people, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure this is the whole point of like the sales engineering team that exists at all these companies. They'll be talking about that. That's not really my thing. My thing's you make the product better and people will follow, right? Like you were saying before, nobody else, I don't think anybody else is going to ship end to end, at least not in a while. And
this is the thing, right? When I fire up, I love using Simpsons references. You remember when Homer dropped a pair of his used underwear into a barrel and all the ghosts flew out? It's like, that's the vibe I get every time I run WebEx, right?
Yes.
So like, there might be this whole idea that, oh no, engineers in China, right? But around Zoom, but every time I use a Cisco product, it just gives me the willies. So Dmitri, I got to ask you, right? Like, I mean, WebEx is American as apple pie, right? But do you see what I'm saying there? Where even when you look at the feature matrix, WebEx has all these supposedly, amazing secure features, but
So to be clear, right, to set the record straight, my only concern around Zoom has always been around the development team and the location of that development team. The bugs, I mean, if you start looking at WebEx, I'm sure they'll find 10 times the number of bugs that Zoom has. Every product has it. And frankly, I think Zoom over the years has done a pretty remarkable job of keeping the numbers pretty low. So again, I think it comes down to what is your risk appetite for the Chinese government potentially infiltrating a company like this. And I think the likelihood of that is very high, given the sort of critical infrastructure that Zoom has become now. And that allows them to introduce backdoors into the code that can be very, very difficult to discover. It's not impossible.
I imagine there would be some, you can mitigate that to a degree with like, having non-US based persons audit that code before it gets committed, things like that. Yes. I mean, there's mitigations, but I guess, you would want to be transparent about those mitigations, right?
That's right. There's ways to mitigate it. It's hard. And by the way, backdoors can happen in American companies. We've seen the famous Juniper backdoor, likely generated from a hack. So anyone can be,
because someone from Juniper who was around at that time was recently like flaming and subtweeting Alex for being at Facebook when bad things happened, And then it's like, you worked at Juniper when you were shipping Chinese government backdoored code to customers and you're giving him shit? That was amazing.
Yeah. So my only point is it's a lot easier to do when a lot of development resources and potentially management resources are in that country. You can have Chinese nationals, you can have people that are American citizens that have been co-opted by other nation states here in the United States. That's all possible. And we've seen cases where that's happened before. It's a lot easier to do it when you have a lot more control.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Look, I think this is a good time to move on to the second part of the discussion. And, Alex and I, we were bouncing this around in Slack. It's like, well, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about Zoom. We're going to talk about Keybase. But what else, right? Like, we got to have some other discussions here. And he's like, well, it's not just Zoom that's been pushed into the security limelight through this crisis. So let's take a look now at some other stories that we've seen. So Gilead has been in the news. Big Pharma generally has been in the news as being a victim of attacks. This has turned into one of those themes, right? Like Alex was just saying that the media picks themes, and it does, right? I can say this because I am in the media. I just think I pick better themes than these guys, right? Yeah, there's all these stories this week about, oh my God, China has attacked Gilead, Iran has attacked, pharma companies and stuff. Now, one of the reasons, that I asked Sherrod to join us is, she's a senior director of threat research at Proofpoint. Proofpoint processes a lot of mail, right? And like 80% APT campaigns, the ones that don't come in through your Citrix or your watering holes or your VPNs. Yeah, exactly, right. The ones who don't come in that way, they come in through email, and it's most of them, right? And how much email does Proofpoint scan? About $1 billion a year worth, right? Like, and turns out that's a lot of email. So Sherrod is just has this incredible visibility into this stuff. And I know from speaking to one of her colleagues earlier in the year, so about the time that Soleimani, the Iranian general, about the time that he got vaped, which is based on the
drone strikes are now getting vaped.
Yes, sorry, I got that from Adam. That's his terminology. Here we go. Published January 2, 2020. So about the time Soleimani got vaped, everyone was saying, oh my God, there's going to be this giant, revenge sequence of attacks and blah, blah, blah. Everyone was expecting like the sort of Iran cyber apocalypse to hit. So one of the first people I called was the team at Proofpoint. I said, well, what are you seeing? And Sherrod, I'll let you pick it up from here because we're seeing this whole narrative hit the press right now that, this whole narrative is saying, oh my God, look at all these Iranian attacks against pharma companies. But it kind of goes back to last year, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we just really haven't seen a major shift in the activity from Iranian APTs that was happening from before, probably like October, November. I have my own theories on it. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I think a lot of the ops that they're doing now were planned 6 months ago.
Most foreign policy experts aren't foreign policy experts either, so that's fine.
I try and, I get questions sometimes about motivations and political implications, and that's not really my strong suit. But I think a lot of the operations that they're carrying out today and that they have carried out since the beginning of the year were planned well in advance, or they just don't really change their tactics and their targeting that much. Pharma is being targeted. But that Reuters article that talks about this, that fish kit, I just don't like doing attribution based off of a fish kit. So that's kind of where I stand on that particular operation. Just saying, well, they use the same fish kit as an APT, so it must be the same actor. Fish kits, they're a dime a dozen. They float around everywhere. You can get a landing page for free. They're everywhere.
Is this the one where there was some Israeli company attributing some behavior to Iranian APTs, specifically targeting Gilead? Is that one?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah.
That's and the source that they cite in the Reuters article is sources, and people say they don't really get into the depth of where they're getting that attribution from. So obviously people are skeptical there.
It's interesting though, because usually when it's Chris Bing at Reuters, and I'm guessing it was he was involved. I'll have to check because it's not one of the ones I tabbed up. So next time you're talking, I'll be over in the other window having a look. But he's got a freaky track record for actually being correct. Like that guy is plugged into all sorts of places. So he's pretty much one of the only cybersecurity reporters where when he says sources say, I believe him.
Well, I would like to see it. So I think that's the thing that we always want is like, oh, can I have a copy of that fish kit and give it to the research team? Like, we'll check it out. But I do think that the Iranian program is, they do a lot of the same things all the time. Again, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but they are so isolated socially, economically. They have a little bit of a different profile from like China or Russia because they need money and they need intellectual property and they have all these sanctions against them. Getting medical supplies and getting pharmaceutical intellectual property is really hard there. So I think that they do try to get that out of not only the pharmaceutical industry in the United States and Europe, but also out of academia. They're famous for slamming academia super hard with attempts at espionage and getting access where they can, just to pivot and use for later, especially against foreign nationals that are in the US teaching at universities here. So I don't feel like there's been a major shift coming out of Iran APT. They're continuing the ops they were doing before. Those just happen to align really well with the coronavirus pandemic currently because they hit pharma.
And that's the thing, right? Like I don't see the connection either. Like I remember saying, and the reason I don't mind saying that it was you guys who told me that big pharma, well, I think the term that your colleague used was life sciences. Yeah, the reason I don't mind that
biotech
mentioning that here is because he was happy for me to say on record that that was a swing that happened last year and that really there was a bit of a ramp up after the Soleimani thing, but that was probably because they were naturally arriving at that phase of those campaigns anyway, where they were sort of going to activate them. And so now we're in May and we've got these articles screaming about Iranian APT crews targeting pharma. And it's like, what, have you not been paying attention?
I don't think that's a big divergence from what they've been doing, especially with the alignment with higher education. A lot of higher education is connected to hospitals. Teaching hospitals and universities are together. Pharma is just a very easy offshoot of that. It doesn't seem out of character for me, and it doesn't seem like there's some big new op. Iran's kind of tried and true, and they're one of the few actors that my team doesn't scream at me at when I talk about them publicly. They're kind of okay because that infrastructure almost, you can't burn it. They don't change that much. So it's not a big change. We'll keep watching them. I don't feel that we really saw any retaliation for Soleimani in terms of cyber.
No.
There wasn't anything.
That's the impression I get from talking to most people I know is that it just didn't materialize.
Why retaliate in cyber when you can launch dozens of missiles?
Well, and they did, but what was really quite funny about that is they didn't really, look, I shouldn't say it was funny because I believe some people were injured, but they lobbed a few rockets at a remote base and then said, this concludes our retaliation, and then went back and had a long, hard look at themselves because, I believe the Soleimani strike was, hurt them big time. And then, obviously now, like much of the rest of the world, they've got bigger problems right now.
I had a question for Sherrod on the, now that people are working from home, obviously email is still a choke point, but everybody's got their devices outside of the corporate IDS, IDP. Maybe their EDR system or their logging is not reporting back correctly outside the network. Have you guys seen a shift towards away from email? Because it seems like if I was trying to take advantage of the work from home situation, I don't think I'd be targeting people through corporate email.
So the shift to work at home has absolutely terrified me for a couple of reasons. First, we focus really heavily on network IDS. We have an IDS product. So now that no one's behind their corporate IDS anymore, it makes me a little freaked out. And people that were using Suricata for threat hunting on their local network, it's all gone. Like it's not there anymore.
Right. Full PCAPS has a different answer
when everyone's at home. Yeah. So that makes me a little nervous, but we haven't seen email volumes in terms of malicious email volumes change. The only thing that we've seen change are the themes. So like it used to be, hey, your invoice is attached. Now it's, hey, your COVID-19 invoice is attached. So they're just kind of sprinkling it around. I've seen some really good ones. Like one said, the Excel spreadsheet attached is a list of names and addresses of people that have been positive around you, that have tested positive for the virus around you, which was a banking Trojan. So they've come up with some pretty good social engineering, but in terms of volumes, neither up nor down compared to last year. So
this is still the easiest way to attack someone. So you've already invested so much research and infrastructure to do it. Why stop? If anything, I think we'll see more of targeting on personal emails versus going through the corporate emails infrastructure. But I think you'll still see that for years to come.
Well, another one that's popular right now, and again, I get this from talking to people like Sherrod, is mail docs via LinkedIn.
Oh, and Slack, and you name it.
And LinkedIn isn't doing nearly enough to stop that stuff, right? You want to send like some really nasty, noisy, hideous, macro malware to someone via LinkedIn, go for it. It'll just let you do it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of those, and then a lot of the free hosting, Dropbox, SharePoint, anywhere that you can drop files, that's a great place to put malware, and they keep doing it. Those are the most malicious sites on the internet by volume, actually, are the free file.
Patrick, if we can get back to the Gilead story for a second, I do think it's important to not get so wrapped up around the targeting of COVID research, because pretty much every country or nearly every country is doing it right now. And frankly, I'm okay with that, because as long as they're not doing anything destructive, it's better for all of us, for the world population, to get inoculated from this. And, if I were a decision maker in the policy circles in the US right now, I would actually relax the prohibition against IP theft as it relates to the COVID research, because I absolutely think that the US intel agencies should be trying to steal formulas and vaccine information and other things from foreign governments.
So hang on. I've got a slightly different perspective on that. I hear what you're saying. You're saying everybody should just go out and steal the IP so that everybody has the IP. What I'm saying is everybody should just have the IP. Like, why on earth this is a profit-motivated endeavor right now? I can't really fault China for trying to go after vaccine information from US companies. This stuff should not be commercial IP in the first place. I believe that, we've got some commercial research in Australia as well, but a lot of it's coming out of universities. A lot of it's grant-funded, stuff like that. Like, that's the way it should be.
And if you were China or Iran, would you trust the United States to share a vaccine with you?
Exactly, especially when you've seen reports that the United States government was trying to acquire a German company so that it could obtain exclusive rights to
or vice versa. Would the US trust China?
Well, hang on. And Dmitri, this is the problem, right? The problem that we've got is that these SIGINT teams aren't trying to obtain this information for the benefit of the world. They're trying to obtain this information to the detriment of other nations and to the advantage of themselves, right? So this isn't about some kumbaya thing. Let's pop some shells, grab some scientific research, and all share it. This is no. If they find out that there is some exotic material that's of limited supply that they're going to need to obtain to create some sort of treatment, let's secure the stocks for our citizens first. That's how this works. And that's why, I think it was back in early March, we were on the show saying this is going to be what every single, cyber SIGINT operator is going to be tasked with for the next few months. My favorite thing out of all of this, though, was the Vietnamese Ocean Lotus popping all these targets in Wuhan, and they got caught, funnily enough, by FireEye, because they found some stuff on VT and pulled it to bits and said, look, lol. And then the Chinese got all stroppy about it. And my favorite one was, the Vietnamese denying it. And they sounded exactly like the Chinese did in 2015. Like, this is outrageous. Cyber attacks are completely
illegal. We don't do that.
Right?
That's right. We don't do that.
Cyber attacks should be punished by law, right? Like, exactly the
hacking
Chinese,
is illegal.
Hacking is illegal. So I don't know. I mean, here we are, right? I mean, can you fault anyone from a moral perspective? Although I got to say, it's been very difficult when you look at Chinese IP theft generally, and how they're trying to use that to drag their people out of poverty. And it's something I've said before. It's hard to fault them on the moral plane for this, right?
Well, I don't have a problem faulting them for that. And there's been few people that have been stronger on that for the last 10 years than me. But the theft of COVID-related research, that just doesn't animate me. It'll be better for the rest of the world if there are no cases anywhere in China included. So I'm okay with that.
I think what we should be worrying about is not the theft of IP. I think what we're going to see is we're going to possibly see some defacements turned into disinformation. So I
agree with that completely. I think that especially Iran, they have such a kind of awesome underground citizen hacker scene where those kids love to deface. They love it. And as we saw with Library of, it was like the Interloan library system at the beginning of the year got defaced by Iranian, Iranian hacker kids. That wasn't state sponsored. It wasn't part of an APT attempt. It was just a defacement of website. But all of a sudden, Iran is attacking the United States.
Right. One of my colleagues helped write up, and you can go to io.stanford.edu if you want to see it. But it was a attack against effectively Poland's West Point, and it looks like it was a Russian group. And I
saw this one. Yeah.
Yeah. They placed a fake letter from
saying
Polish
from
general.
the commander of the school saying,
Yes.
Americans out, they're invading our country
Right.
and eroding our culture or some stuff
Exactly.
like that, right?
And then they had the disinfo side preloaded. So the moment the letter's up, all of a sudden all of these accounts start pointing out, oh my God, look at this. I totally believe this guy and such. And then when the letter's pulled down, it's part of the conspiracy. And you could totally see that, right? With China and the United States trying to blame each other for this. You could totally see some weird little corner site of NIH, right, that nobody's ever talked about, having a memo from Dr. Fauci about the secret American bioweapon, and then all of a sudden CCTV, Shinhao, all of New China, all of their different brands hit it immediately. And, most Americans won't fall for it, but there's a lot of people globally who would be open to that theory. And then that will be like the CIA invented AIDS, right? Like for 3 decades, people will believe it.
Worse than that, Alex, the big challenge we'll have as a globe is getting everyone to take the vaccine once it's developed, right? And you're going to have plenty of anti-vaxxers jumping on this, saying that this is not safe, it's causing autism and everything else. Imagine that being amplified by
it's a conspiracy by Bill Gates.
Oh God, we had a group of 100 protesters.
He should be arrested, they say. Arrest Bill Gates. We had 100
protesters chanting "Arrest Bill Gates" on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House in Melbourne, Australia, right? Like, it just like... Bill Gates needs money? Is this your thing?
Right.
Like,
this is why I love conspiracies about Bill Gates. Is like, what kind of side job can this guy have? Right? Like, what's the upside to him about being part of any kind of conspiracy? Like,
the
guy couldn't even spend the money that he has. I mean, none of it makes sense. And look, what I was going to say is I live in basically one of the anti-vax capitals of the planet, right? Where I live in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. There's a few towns around here where people are like, very vocal anti-vax movements. And it is a problem, right? Like you see stuff breaking out here that shouldn't, whooping cough, stuff like that. But it's not to the degree that it would present a problem. Like speaking as someone who lives in a problematic anti-vax area, it's not something where it would be a problem in the COVID-19 way, right? Like you would have enough people doing it that it would drop off. Where you get issues is things like measles, where it has every person with measles can infect 14 others, right? Like those super contagious things. So I think the anti-vax thing is not so much of a concern, but I think every right-thinking person I know has been somewhat alarmed by what they're seeing on Facebook in terms of the convergence of all of these crazy conspiracy theories and the types of people who are going for them. So as I say, I live in a sort of anti-vax area, right? There's a lot of hippies around here. And what's crazy is the yoga hippies getting in on in Australia, getting in on pro-Trump QAnon stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen is these people, regardless of political ideology and background, they see themselves as truth seers, right? Like whether you're some yoga hippie, free the mind, or whether or not you're some insane fascist, like everyone with an alternative worldview is sort of coalescing around this stuff. What amazes me about the QAnon stuff, and I think it was the hosts of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, which is very funny, by the way, if people want to check that out. Although the most recent episode, they were sort of similarly saying conspiratorial stuff about Bill Gates, which didn't really make any sense. You can't parody it and repeat it, guys, just so you know. They were pointing out that once you dig into this QAnon stuff, you go looking for the source of it. You go looking for the guiding documents or the proof or what it hinges on, and there's nothing there. It's all just layers and layers of memes and angry tweets and weird rants on Facebook, but there is nothing concrete that underpins any of it, which is just what makes it so strange. And I wonder at what point we start questioning whether foreign adversaries are pushing this stuff, right? Because if I'm Russia, I'm all over QAnon. It's QAnon 24/7.
So, I mean, I think I expect that QAnon is related to the 8chan people. So they are, well, maybe American citizens. They're residing overseas.
Wow, look at you, Alex. You really know your scary internet groups. You've got anarcho-fascist, crypto, this and that, 8chan. You got it all.
I got them all. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of people who love me. So actually,
me too.
Yeah, you too. So this is actually, our team's going to be writing we're doing a huge piece on this, where we're looking at one of the fascinating things that's going on is COVID has aligned all of these states. Sort of the first time really in history, every country in the world has the same number one concern, which is defending themselves against their own population, saying we're doing a good job, and then in some cases tearing down their opponents, right? And so you have this huge alignment where every single disinformation actor has shifted to COVID as their number one topic, and it gives us this opportunity to study what their capabilities are, what their tactics are, what their reach is like. And so we're going to be writing a lot about it. But the people who are really influential in the U.S. right now are all grifters, right? So it's not like a state organized actor. The people behind Plandemic, it's not a secret. So my colleague Renee DiResta has been tweeting about this, and she started several weeks ago that, there's a guy who's like an ex-Googler, and there's some kind of, scam artists who are basically part of a group to try to make this one person a star, and to try to make this movie big and to sell stuff with it. And it's this
it's all about the coffee mugs. Like, this was the amazing thing that came out of the aftermath of the 2016 election, is most of the people pushing misinformation, it was so they could sell T-shirts. It had nothing to do with Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And that continues to be both. It's difficult to deal with them because there's so many of them, right? Like, it's one thing to deal with all these people who are sitting in St. Petersburg. It's another when you have 2 dozen, 3 dozen groups that are popping up and down and have no link to each other. The conspiracy's in the open. They don't need some kind of secret back-end Telegram channel. They're conspiring in the open. But the other is, from a policy perspective, it makes it much more difficult because they're not foreign adversaries. They're not lying about who they are. So unless they are pushing content that is so extreme that you can action the content, they create this really difficult policy issue, especially when you also have in the United States Republican senators basically, and the president, playing cover for them, right? And threatening legal action, threatening Section 230, threatening regulation, threatening prosecution if the companies do the right thing here. And so it's like a huge mess in the U.S. And unfortunately, I don't think it's only going to get worse between now and November. We do not have as much freedom of speech as you, and in situations like this, it's like, thank God, right? Because you would not want to host that sort of crap in Australia. Like, if you're pushing disinformation related to health, they're going to find some regulation to deal with that. Where I understand in the United States, it's much more difficult. So what are the Murdoch properties doing around COVID? Like, what's their line on this?
Oh man, it's interesting, right? Because you can see that there's some of the columnists who are just itching to go the US line. The most interesting thing that happened, actually, so I'll give you a case study here. Did you hear about that Five Eyes dossier, right? Saying that COVID-19 came out of a Chinese lab. By the way, there is some evidence to suggest that might have happened, and that's something that this week we're going to be looking into. There's some.
There's no such thing as a Five Eyes document. There's a document.
But this is the thing.
Distributed Five Eyes, but they're not jointly written.
Okay. So it looks like what's happened, right? That whole story originated in the Saturday Telegraph, which is a really shitty tabloid in Sydney. It's one of the most read newspapers in the country, but it's a Murdoch tabloid. And it was written by Sherry Markson, who is very much aligned with the company's values. Let's just put it that way. The thinking is that document was leaked to her by the US Embassy, okay? Which I sent out a tweet saying, at what point is that foreign disinformation in an Australian context? When you have the US Embassy leaking documents that, and here's the best thing, the Australian government...
I bet we could look that up here, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an example of the KGB giving a document to a foreign newspaper.
It literally took the Australian government a while to find what document they were talking about, because they're like, what document is this? And it was a 15-page document, all based on OSINT stuff. So anyway, Sherry Markson writes it up for the Saturday Telly, and obviously it blows up. A lot of people are redoing this report. And then it's like this self-licking ice cream thing, because then she winds up going on Tucker Carlson to talk about it. So you've got a leak from the US government to an Australian Murdoch journalist who's appearing on a Murdoch TV thing, and it's just like the circle of life, right? It's crazy. But look, they've been a little bit more restrained here than I expected. Because they know that Australians are overwhelmingly supportive of lockdown measures. It's not like the US. We had zero, for the first time since the pandemic began, we actually had 0 detected cases in my state, New South Wales, overnight. That's the most populous state in Australia and was the most seriously affected. So
17 humans, 440 kangaroos, right? New South Wales.
Well, we had about just under 7,000 cases nationally. We've had, I think, around about 100 deaths. So it's not been too bad here. And it looks like things are gradually getting back to normal. So I think I think the Murdoch press here realized that if they went to war with the government here, they were going to lose.
Well, they were also behind the curve. I think they saw with Fox News how Fox News got way out in front on the saying it was a hoax. And then their viewers started dying, which is it is incredibly sad, but I think this, unlike other disinformation campaigns, might be self-correcting, right? Because in these other campaigns, people are making decisions that where the impact of the decisions are on other people, right? Like you believe some kind of anti-immigration disinformation, you vote for Trump, you don't have the impact. But in this case, if people, if you believe in the science, then you should also believe that there's a possibility of the people who are violating the rules, who aren't wearing the mask when they go out to Walmart, who are going to these protests, that they and their friends are going to get sick.
Well, you see the headline every single day when it says so-and-so, huge leader of protests against lockdown, dead from coronavirus. I mean, I've seen one of those just about every day now.
Yeah. And we're, only within a week of a bunch of the protests, right? So like 3-4 weeks from now, we're going to be seeing that. There's also, there's a whole category of Facebook posts that's basically my husband, because it's hitting men worse. My husband was MAGA. He didn't believe in this and now he's dead. And I want to warn everybody else. And so I do think like there is a possibility here that this will self-correct and that people will look around and finally realize I've been manipulated.
It's a bit too hard, isn't it, to run a disinformation campaign when you can see it right in front of you. I mean, I've been speaking to some of my friends, one of my friends in Washington, who's been quite nervous about this, and it's just really weird coming at this from an Australian perspective, where it would be very, very difficult for me to catch it here, right? So you just don't worry about it in the same way. And then you talk to an American friend and you're like, okay, this person's quite worried. You think about why. And then you look at the infection numbers where they are. And it's just, the US is just crawling with this thing. I mean, I feel, I'm at the point now where I feel genuinely like it's heartbreaking. I'm sorry, guys, that this is
I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So, our governor is a fool. He just opened the bowling alleys, tattoo parlors, get a haircut, get a manicure all in the same day. And this was 2 weeks ago, I think. Our lockdown or our stay-home orders were maybe 2 weeks. Yeah. And, he's fighting with the mayor of Atlanta, telling her she can't override his state choice to open things and she can't shut things down in the city. And
how are infections tracking there?
Well, they've stopped doing as much testing, but we have a huge hotspot in South Georgia and Albany, huge, from 2 funerals where people refuse to not go to them. We're being led to the slaughter. I'm staying home.
You look at South Korea, right, where they reopened and they've got test and trace. And one guy, it looks like, infected several dozen people from several nightclubs. And to find those several dozen people, they had to interview thousands, right? Yeah. And so we would never even know if one person went to a bowling alley in Georgia until the mortality rate ticks up in a month.
Well, that's part of Cuomo's reopening plan for the state of New York, is that you have to have a tracing program that can get to 1,000 people in a certain amount of time. And you have to have this number of tracers, or you can't check that metric off to open.
Yeah. Same in California. There's a standard that Elon Musk is now freaking out about.
Let's not. Okay, because we've already wandered off topic. Let's not let that guy
Tesla
come
people
into
aren't
this.
angry at me either. Like we gotta add.
Yeah, you've got 8chan, the crypto fascists.
Yeah.
Now Musk
8chan.
fanboys,
Wow.
Fox News viewers, old people. By calling it a self-correcting problem, I thought you were sort of implying that, well, they're all going to die.
No, I don't think they're all going to die. I think their friends are going to die. I think like it's going to get to the point like now. It's getting to the point in America where everybody knows somebody I know several people who have survived, and I know a couple of people who have died. Distant. I don't have any close friends, right, or family members, fortunately. But we're going to get to that point where everybody knows somebody, and it's going to be like, this is one of the differences I think of when 9/11 happened. Everybody in New York knew somebody who died, right? Everybody. And that was not true for the rest of the country. And this is going to be like 9/11, but it's going to affect the entire nation. And like what that's going to do to the American psyche, like considering how crazy we went for 2 decades after 9/11, like what this is going to do to American politics.
Yeah, but this is different, right? That was a one-day event. this is going to happen over months, and people are going to get desensitized to it. So,
I mean,
don't know if
I
we
hate
get
to
desensitized
I hate to bring
people
this
we
up,
actually
but
know dying.
I've read a couple of columns. Over the last couple of days from Australian columnists saying that the US is on the brink of it's a bit overwrought, saying that it's on the brink of some sort of major societal pain, but also a lot of articles saying there was one that was very interesting, and I'll try to put a link in the description below if anyone's actually got this far with this video. But the description, the story basically said that Australians have had to really reconsider what we thought we were like Americans, and we're not. And it's just, you're in so much strife over there. And as someone I've been to the US maybe a dozen times. I love the US. It's a great place. It's a great country, and it's very sad to see what's happening over there, both in terms of the disease and also the shit poor response to it. It's just been heartbreaking. But guys, look, we should wrap it up there because we've put in a solid hour of discussion. Thank you very much for joining me for this discussion. And yeah, we're going to do it again. I'll just ask. I'm going to end the broadcast now, but I just ask you to say goodbye and then hang around because I want to talk to all of you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everybody.